Hey guys, I'm Janet on occasion, and today we're playing the Total War. No, we're not. I'm just in the habit of saying that. We're playing the lore play, obviously. Yeah, it's part 4, I think. Yeah, part 4. See, I know where I am. You're crazy. So we're going to be talking about Cothique now. Cothique just attacked us before in that last episode, but we fought them off. Yeah, they actually took land from us, which is very rude. But them sailing down the coast is actually very lore-friendly, so I'm very glad the AI decided to, reinforce the lore of Cothique by doing that. It's nothing to do with the fact that I've got a movement speed mod that makes it more, that lets them go on water quicker, and so the AI saw that as the quickest route there. No, that's nothing to do with it. No, they're trying to be lore-friendly. So, we're going to talk about Cothique. So, Cothique is a coastal kingdom inhabited by shrewd and hardy sea folk. It is a cold realm, battered by chill northeastern winds, and little loved saved by its own people. Yet even these folk of Cothique are renowned for their wanderlust, and reputedly spend as little time within their own land as possible. Their graceful vessels plough the turbulent northern waters in search of food and trade with different lands. This is a highly dangerous area to sail, not just because of the perilous waters, but because the seas contain many monstrous creatures stirred up by the collapse of northern Ulthuan centuries ago. Kraken, huge shark-like megalodons, behemoths, and even the dread Black Leviathan are all known to lurk in the waters north of Ulthuan. To survive in such waters requires great skill, but the elves of Cothique are the finest sailors in the world. Sleek alabaster war catamarans prowl the coast, their lookouts ever alert for deep-spawned perils. Skyships, their timbers infused with magic, scout the reefs and archipelagos in search of dark elf raiders, while messengers mounted on the giant flying fish of the Outer Isles carry news landward. So flying ships. Skycutter seems a little less ridiculous now, right? And also, giant flying fish. That is awesome, and why is that on the game? Please put in giant fish with, elves riding them. That sounds fantastic. Anyway, moving on. In these dwindling days, most of Ulthuan's realms are inward-facing, concerning themselves with the wider world only when not doing so would invite disaster. Only the nobles of Cothique look to the wider world as a source of opportunity. This is why the later voyages of Finnabar the Seafarer were conducted on ships from Cothique, for no other living mariner on Ulthuan could match the breadth of knowledge found within their realm. So again, that's a callback to what we were previously discussing about Finnabar, being, basically someone who could actually be bothered to go and, make contact with the rest of the world again, and that was a great source of wealth, for Laverne. So, but he had to do it on Cothique's ships, because they're the only ones that are hardy enough. So pretty cool, I think. Cothique cities and fortresses are more practical, and of much sturdier build than those found in other realms. After all, they were designed primarily to survive the weather, rather than serve as aesthetic examples. Indeed, the realm's true treasures can be found underground, amidst the network of caves and caverns that honeycomb the region's cliff faces and valleys. It was to here that the folk of Cothique retreated during invasions of times past, and over the centuries, that which was born of necessity became a way of life. Okay, these guys live underground. So they're seafarers who live underground. These guys are interesting. I don't know why they never really got fleshed out in terms of their own units and stuff. I think it's a bit of a shame, because they seem very interesting. They're not typical elves, so I think that's a lot of fun. So, moving on again, there's more guys. Now, many of Cothique's palaces lie beneath the surface. Their walls are the land's alabaster rock, brilliantly polished and decorated with a webwork of finely wrought silver and star sapphires. No shadow falls here, for darkness is a fit companion only for goblin warrens and the grim redouts of the dwarfs. Instead, Cothique's grottos and halls are lit by a magical glow from the rock itself, set there in ages past by the most accomplished mages of the realm. Anywhere else in the world, underground halls such as this would be under constant threat from the Skaven, but to Ulthuan, which rests not on bedrock, but is rather held upon the waves by magic, the Ratman can make no subterranean passage. So that's another very interesting thing about Ulthuan. It is literally afloat. It's literally a floating island. The whole continent is held, aloft. So yeah, no risk of all the same dangers that you come to expect in the rest of the old world, which is pretty cool. So they're pretty lucky. But, you know, demons quite like it there because there's a vortex, and, you know, get rid of that and the world is theirs. So it comes with its own dangers, I suppose. So anyway, there's more. Alas, as glorious as the halls of Cothique are, the finest were lost during the dark days of the Sundering. The waters of the Eastern Ocean rose up in a mighty wave and flooded the palaces nearest to the sea. Though the waters mostly retreated, as it did not in Tiranoc and Nagaraith, no elf will lightly enter those chambers, for the bitter tang of the sea and the stench of the wave-rotten dead hangs about them. Indeed, Cothiquan mariners, that's right, Cothiquan is plural for Cothique. Cothiquians, Cothiquan, they're Cothiquan. Anyway, Cothiquan mariners tell that the spirits of the drowned still haunt those passages, holding court amongst tapestries of tangled kelp and hoards of tarnished treasure. This reads so much like the fluff for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. It's basically just giving great opportunities for dungeon crawling, which I think is kind of cool. But yeah, Cothique just seems like such a unique place amongst, you know, all the other more sort of haughty-taughty kind of places, you know, that the elves consider home. But then you'll find the provinces actually vary a heck of a lot. And, you know, this is kind of what the series is about, is, you know, really learning about all that stuff. But I think Cothique is an incredibly interesting place. But given how interesting it is, it's odd that that's actually all the information I have about Cothique. There are no units specifically from Cothique, because there's no extra fluff in, you know, unit text or anything. And yeah, I've googled it. There's nothing else in earlier editions. I read that from the 8th edition army book, and earlier editions is literally just the same text, but slightly less concise. That's all they've done. They've just revised text from previous editions. It doesn't really add any more detail, honestly. So there's nothing else to talk about Cothique, which is really sad, because just that, you know, brief little blurb about it is so interesting that I'd love to be able to talk more about it. But I guess I'll just have to talk more about, you know, now everyone's favourite, everyone's favourite province. That's right, it's Yvresse. I've got another story about Yvresse. But this is beautiful because basically last session we talked about both Yvresse and Phoenixes, and we spoke about Moranion, you know, who was before Eltharion, right? Eltharion was his oldest son and became, you know, the Prince of Yvresse afterwards. So yeah, pretty cool. This story's got, you know, some extra details there, as well as just some badass Phoenix stuff. So we're gonna talk about that, and you're gonna enjoy it. So this happened in this happened about hang on, trying to check the dates here. So this happened in the 97th year of Finnebar's reign, which is about, yeah, like just shy of 300 years ago, basically. So a while ago now. But of course, we already know that Moranion died, so, you know, is before all of that. The Mists of Wailing Fen. Through the confluence of wind and ill fate, the enchanted mists about the shrouded shore billowed and thickened. As they grew ever more dense, their accumulated magics shone like a beacon within the realm of chaos. Thus did demons find purchase upon the lands of Yvresse. The elves met the demonic hosts on the outward edge of the Wailing Fen. Moranion of Atilla rode at their head. He was owed many favours by princes of other lands, and so the tall spearmen of his holdings were joined by warriors from Trace, Eataine, and even further afield. Moranion would need all their skill and valour in the hours to come. At the battle's height, a bloodthirster descended from the skies, roaring and bellowing as it carved bloody ruin through a regiment of white lions. The woodsmen of Trace fought on, even though they knew that they were overmatched. Their fortitude was soon repaid with salvation. Flamespire Phoenix, fire streaming behind, dove out of the darkness to rake the bloodthirster with its mighty talons. With a thunderous crack, the demon's whip lashed out, coiling around the firebird's neck. The phoenix shrieked in fury as its mighty wings strove in vain to bear it aloft once more. But the bloodthirster was too strong. Oblivious to the white lion's axe blows, the demon hauled the beast close and tore out its throat with savage fangs. Casting the phoenix's corpse to the ground, the bloodthirster roared in triumph. Yet the fires of the fallen phoenix did not extinguish with its death. They continued to blaze, growing ever hotter and more furious with each passing moment. The white lions fell back as their cloaks caught light, but the bloodthirster, maddened with gore lust, came on through the flames. 3 steps had the demon taken, when there was a thunderous boom. The phoenix's body exploded in a shower of smouldering plumage, and a column of fire spiraled into the sky. Caught at the conflagration's heart, the bloodthirster's flesh blackened and cracked, but, insensate to pain, it came on, hungry for blood. Indeed, so intent was it on claiming the skulls of the remaining white lions that it did not notice the flames draw together and coalesce into a new form, the Phoenix Reborn. It took but a moment for the flame-spire Phoenix to sight its erstwhile slayer, and giving out a great shriek, it dove to the attack. On hearing the cry, the bloodthirster turned, but before the demon could bring its weapons to bear, the Phoenix was upon it once more. Talons sank deep into the bloodthirster's shoulders, and an iron-hard beak punched through the demon's armor to pierce the black heart within its chest. One last bellow, the demon's mortal form perished, and its spirit was cast back into the realm of chaos. With this final blow, the battle was won. As the bloodthirster fell, the magic sustaining his army began to unravel. The demon army faded back into the mists, and peace fell upon Yvres for a time. So obviously we know kind of what happened, later on in Yvres, because we've talked about that before. Grom the Paunch and, Moranion being killed, Eltharion's dad. But there is actually an alternate telling of some of that, which I think is quite interesting. In, I believe this is 6th edition, I think. It's 5th or 6th, anyway. High Elf Army book. There's actually a slightly different tale, which I think is quite cool. So, Eltharion. The blind Eltharion has suffered greatly throughout his life, yet his formidable strength of will has overcome every obstacle in his past. During a daring raid on the Dark Elf city of Nagarond, he was mortally wounded by the poisoned blade of a corrupted witch elf hag. We knew that already. Eltharion walked the paths of the dead, leaving his mortal shell far behind. While he was away from home, the marauding goblin hordes of Grom the Paunch attacked Ulthuan, devastating the landscape and slaughtering countless of the Azure. In the shadowy lands of death, the apparition of his father approached, telling Eltharion of his family's murder at the hands of the goblin raiders. So, slightly different version. He was supposedly recuperating somewhere in the north, when Grom the Paunch turned up. But that's not the case. In this story, he was actually, I guess in the spirit world, he was dead. So he decided to stop that. So he entreated Eltharion to return to the flesh and to save Tor Yvres from certain destruction. Through sheer strength of will, the need for vengeance lending him strength, Eltharion forced himself back into his fatally wounded body, fighting and overcoming the poison that raced through his system. Having conquered death itself, he returned to Tor Yvres, leading the High Elves to victory over the goblin hordes inside the very gates of the city. He was chosen as the Warden of Tor Yvres, a duty he fulfilled with great vigilance. It was as Warden that he stood defiant before the wrath of the dread Witch King of Nagaroth, Malekith himself. Overcome by foul sorcery, Eltharion was subjected to unspeakable tortures, leaving him shattered in body and mind, a warning to those who defy the Witch King, harnessing his unfathomable strength of will. Eltharion has drawn power from his ordeal and entered the Order of the Swordmasters of Hoeth, excelling in all areas of his training, despite losing his eyes at the hands of Malekith. Where he lost his... Where he fought Malekith, I'm not sure. I'm going to try and figure that out. And I'll be sure to bring that up when we, talk more about the Dark Elves, which I'm probably, going to end up talking about in some detail in this campaign, just because they're, High Elves villains, right? They're the antithesis of the High Elves, so it makes sense. But yeah, so Eltharion, he was blinded and killed. So that's pretty rough. He's had a bit of an ordeal, bless him. So yeah, pretty cool. And there's also a story. We already heard that the Lawmaster Bellinair, the Lawmaster, I think, not the Swordmaster, is the Lawmaster Bellinair, was kind of a like a mentor of his, and also friend to Tyrion as well. But he was sort of his main counsel and advisor as Bellinair, and he existed in the fluff of earlier editions as well. So I'm going to tell you a story about them as well. There's a lot more sort of, I guess, it's spoken with less sort of like sort of a historical book in early editions. It's pretty much just like little short stories. a lot of the fluff, which is a lot of fun. I really like them. So there's a story here, The Blade Reforged. So the sharp ring of steel upon steel echoed across the valley as the two warriors parried each other's blows. Each combatant wielded his sword with total precision, fending off the thrust of his opponent and instantly counterattacking. Arms punched out, whipping the air as the warriors parried each attack with a speed that was almost invisible to the eye. For hours the warriors had been locked in this swirling combat, neither one able to outmatch the other. Neither showed any sign that they had been fighting for more than a minute. No beads of sweat glistened off their brows, their breathing was controlled and steady. Had anyone been witness to the fight, they would have been in awe of the skill of these elves. What was even more impressive was the fact that one of the deft swordsmen wore a bandage across his eyes, and yet was able to defend thrusts that even the most skilled fighter would have had trouble blocking. As this remarkable warrior somersaulted in a backward flip to avoid a ferocious swing of his opponent's sword, the two were briefly separated from the combat. "Come, Belinair. Have you grown so weak that you cannot even better a cripple? You promised to test my skills," the masked warrior called out sourly. "Your body is in fine shape. It is the wound in your heart that needs to heal." The ancient lawmaster was an exceptionally skilled warrior. He had spent many years practicing his art, and though his talents were now directed towards the mastery of magic, he still considered himself one of the finest swordsmen on Ulthuan. Yet even he could not gain the upper hand in this fight. His student had learned well. "You are too eager to fight me, Eltharion. It is death or glory that you seek?" The master spoke with calm authority. "Victory, master." Eltharion let a rare smile cross his face as he replied. "Come, it is nearly dusk. Neither of us shall be victor at this day." Belinair pointed to the setting sun as he spoke, and then dropped his hand in embarrassment when he remembered the gesture would go unseen by his companion. "I have no sun now, only darkness," Eltharion replied solemnly. Bit angsty, isn't it? Anyway. Only 7 months ago, the broken husk of the once proud Warden of Yvresse had been brought to the Tower of Hoeth for Belinair to attend. The physical wounds had healed quickly enough, remarkably so in fact, but it was months before the mental torture of Eltharion's ordeal at the hands of Malekith had even begun to pass. Only by immersing himself in the study of the ways of the Swordmaster had Eltharion been able to find a fragile inner peace. Tome after tome had been carefully read out to him, over and over, but even the most talented swordmasters took decades to train, and Eltharion had only studied for a matter of months. Belinair had laughed at his insistence that he was ready to join the ranks of the elite warriors of Hoeth, but Eltharion's constant passionate pleas had finally got the better of the ancient sage, and he had agreed to this duel. Now, though, he had a fresh respect for his pupil. Indeed, Eltharion was as skilled a fighter as any on Ulthuan, but it was not his prowess in battle that worried Belinair. No, it was the darkness that had settled in Eltharion's soul that was cause for concern. Even before Malekith's tortures had worked their wicked skills upon him, Eltharion had been a bitter warrior, plagued by the memory of his family's death while he lay helpless. The Warden of Yvresse had been eager to attack their dark cousins, the Druchii of Nagaroth, and even against the advice of both Tyrion and the Phoenix King, had led his army across the waves, seeking vengeance for the ancient wrongs of Malekith. Foolish pride, thought Belinair. Eltharion's arrogance almost matched that of the Witch King at times, and had goaded the ruler of Nagaroth from his dormancy of the last decades. In his rashness, Eltharion had brought the wrath of the Witch King thundering down onto Ulthuan, and even now, while Eltharion recovered here in Hoeth, brave Tyrion strove to drive this new invasion back in the north. Defeated and physically crushed, Eltharion had been a shadow of his former glorious self. Even now, after so much healing, the elf was racked with guilt and anger in equal measure, unable to stomach the peace and serenity that all others came to Hoeth to find. No, Malekith's lesson had not been learnt well by the young warden, who was more eager than ever to bring war and death into the realms of Ulthuan. Such burning anger could never lead to good. As he considered the shortcomings of Eltharion, Belinair circled around his student. True, it was not an honourable way to best a blind man, but not all foes were honourable, and he wished to prove once and for all that Eltharion could no longer adequately defend himself and his companions on the field of battle. Eltharion was stood in the shadow of a tree, with his head cocked to listen for any movement. With 3 rapid steps and a swift rolling of his wrists, Belinair arced his sword at waist height towards Eltharion's unguarded back. A mere fraction of a second before the sword cleaved into his midriff, Eltharion leapt high into the air, landing on a branch above his head. Amazed by the surprise move, Belinair stood dumbfounded. Eltharion sprinted on tiptoe down the length of the branch. Diving through the air, Eltharion landed with a lithe roll, before standing upright to face Belinair in one fluid motion. The Swordmaster spun around to meet his opponent. Clad in Ithilmar armour, his movements were graceful and almost silent, but to the finely tuned hearing of the blind elf, even the slightest chink of metal upon metal rang out as clear as a bell. It was all the chance Eltharion needed. Launching himself through the air, he threw his blade towards the location of the noise. The sword flew straight as a javelin towards the intended target. Belinair was taken by surprise by the unexpected move and barely managed to deflect the blade. His opponent was now without a weapon, but it mattered little. Even as Belinair brought his sword back from deflecting the attack, the warrior was atop him, his boots landing squarely on the jaw of the elf sage. The two fell to the ground, and Belinair realised his error too late, as the tip of a dagger nicked the flesh of his throat. No more, good friend. I think you have proven yourself worthy of our order, Belinair said as he lay prone on the lush carpet of grass. For a moment, Eltharion hesitated, his face set in a grim expression, and the Lawmaster feared he had pushed the Warden too far with his ignoble attack. After several heartbeats, Eltharion stood and offered his hand to the flawed Belinair, who, grasping it firmly, pulled himself from the ground. The Lawmaster retrieved his opponent's blade from where it had landed and handed it back to the blind warrior. Let us return to the White Tower. There is still more that I can learn, Eltharion stated coldly. You are setting down a path that can lead to great glory or great tragedy. Belinair replied after a moment's thought. There is nothing more for you to study in the ways of fighting. Now you must study your own heart. So, you know, it's very Anakin Skywalker. All of that. It's you know, it's one of those tales which seems to be the case with a lot of the High Elves. Truth be told, they're very much on a knife's edge, which is, you know, what led to you know, Malekith and the Dark Elves rising in the first place. It's the fact that within the elves there is a darker, you know, there's a darker part of them, and that seems to be played with a lot with you know, the main characters. The idea that they could actually just be self-interested and backstabbing and awful, and they might just be tempted by, you know, Cain or just their darker, you know, pleasures. So yeah, you know, vengeance, wrath, all that terrible stuff, you know, all that biblical stuff. So yeah, I think they play on that quite a lot, to be honest. Possibly a bit too much. Which is why they might have dialed back Eltharion a little bit, just so they can have one guy who's actually just a hero. Yeah, he's grim, but, you know, he's not like a blind, angsty ninja Jedi, right? So they dialed it back a bit. But I do love the idea that he was blinded. I think that's awesome. The fact that he's still that capable. And, you know, he went and trained under, you know, this master in order to sort of regain his abilities, and he did. And I think that's just incredibly badass, given how much we already know about him. So, really cool guy. So, hopefully, we'll see him in Total War Warhammer in due course, because he's definitely, you know, he's definitely worthy of a, you know, a DLC or something. The guy's awesome. So yeah, so that's Eltharion again. So more about him later, probably, when I find more. It's amazing how much stuff I keep finding. I thought I'd gone through all my books pretty thoroughly, but nope, keep finding more stuff, which is always good fun. But not about Cothique, which was the point of this episode. I was hoping we could talk about Cothique more, but we do actually now. Yeah, but probably about, I don't know, 10 minutes ago in this video, you saw we actually got some trade agreements with Bretonnia and technically Marienburg, because it's Bretonian now. I sent my noble up there to, you know, do some scouting, and he managed to find Marienburg. Unfortunately, Marienburg doesn't exist anymore in this campaign, but they are actually the focus of a couple of stories, which I think is quite interesting. So I'm gonna tell those now, so we can see life outside of Ulthuan a bit, to see how the rest of the world sort of fares, you know, with dealing with the High Elves, I suppose. So we're going to move on to that now. Actually, not now, I'm lying. So, first off, I just want to mention, I did talk about Marienburg in a lot of detail in my Empire lore play. I think it's episode 3 and 4, possibly, off the top of my head. Possibly 4 and 5. It was a couple episodes, and I did mention the Elven Quarter, and the fact that there are elves in Marienburg. And that's actually just down to, you know, Finnabar making contact with, you know, the rest of the world. Marienburg is a massive trade hub, and a lot of elves now actually live there. So that's all you really need to know. But if you want to learn more, it's been covered in a previous, you know, lore play. So feel free to check that out. So this story actually takes place in the 181st year of Finnebar's reign, which is, you know, around 200 years ago. Still recent memory for elves. Elves are old, you know, it's that simple. So, the sack of Marienburg. So already, you know, things aren't necessarily going to work out great. So, guided by luck more than judgment, Otto Steinroth, the infamous Red Pirate of Marienburg, led a mighty fleet through Ulthuan's mists. So again, to rest, right? So anyway, his wolf-proud ships laid waste to the city of Sardenath, and his crews plundered its treasures. Thus did Steinroth's ships depart for home, far wealthier than they had arrived. With these deeds did the Red Pirate bring woe upon the city of Marienburg, for he earned the wrath of the Sea Lord Aeslin, whose fleet had come to Sardenath's aid too late. Aeslin's ships were swift and could easily have overtaken the Red Pirate and destroyed him at sea, but the Sea Lord was determined to set an example not soon forgotten by the upstart race of man. So it was that he shadowed Steinroth's ships across the stormy seas, using every ounce of nautical cunning at his command to remain undetected. Only when the Red Pirate's fleet was berthed once more alongside Marienburg's Gildeveld docks did Aeslin strike. As the battle begun, the gunners of Marienburg's coastal fortresses, long practiced though they were at repelling raids from Bretonnia and Norska, found their aim cheated by an inexplicable mist that swept over the Reichsmouth the instant the first shot was fired. Under cover of the mist, the High Elf fleet took up blockade formation and began bombardment of the port. Aeslin's flagship, Breindragon, its gunwales filled to bursting with the finest warriors of Luthern, sailed full into the harbour and disgorged its troops along the dockside. Had the Marienburgers known the reasons for Aeslin's attacks, they might well have stood aside and allowed his vengeance to proceed unimpeded, the better to end the blockade of their city. As it was, they knew only that their home was afire, and the Elven warriors marched in their streets. Thus, Aeslin's warriors found their path to Steinroth's wolf prows, blocked only by the Red Pirate's rough curs, but some of Nordland's finest troops. Oh yes, at this time, Marienburg was actually part of Nordland. Actually no, it would have been part of the... That would have been part of the Westerland. Huh. Anyway, I'm not sure it's a free city at this point. I'm not sure it'd been bought yet. There's a bribe to an emperor. It's all covered in the Empire lore play. But anyway, so began a confused battle along the dockside. The elves had the better of it from the start, for the mist was of their making, and thus little impediment to their eyes. It was soon too much for the Red Pirate's men, who had no taste for fighting on the losing side. When Steinroth himself was cut down by Aeslin's blade, the survivors threw down their blades and dove into the water to escape. Yet there was no escape there from Aeslin's keen-eyed archers. The will of the pirates might have been broken, but the soldiers of Marienburg fought with all the desperation of men defending their home. Handguns coughed and boomed as Nordland marksmen vainly searched for targets in the mist. The harbour rang with the clash of steel upon steel as halberdiers and swordsmen sought to drive the elves from the quayside. Yet they fought in vain. Little by little, the High Elves scoured the docks about the wolf prows. As the Lothen Sea Guard formed spear walls to secure the quayside, other elves boarded the wolf prows and retrieved all that was truly valuable: books of ancient lore, sceptres and circlets of rule, and the weapons of Sardenath princes. Then, at Aeslin's command, the elves retreated to the Breindragon. Breindragon's cool name for a ship. Anyway, taking with them not only their dead, but also a large number of extremely vocal elven merchants, whose stores of fine wine and eastern silks would now have to be abandoned. No elf could hope to remain free in Marienburg after that day's deeds. As Aeslin's flagship rejoined his fleet, he turned back towards Marienburg with narrowed eyes. He gave a sharp nod to the mages assembled upon the foredock, and they called down a conflagration of living flame upon the dockside. The fires quickly spread from ship to jetty, and from jetty to warehouse, consuming all in their path. By the time the Breindragon had reached open sea, all of Marienburg's merchant fleet and much of the city's hoarded wealth had been reduced to ashes upon the wind. Aeslin returned to a mixed reception on Ulthuan. The kin of those slain at Sardenath hailed him as a hero, as did those princes who believed the power of the High Elves should be felt more keenly in other lands. Many others, especially those who had benefited greatly from trade with Marienburg, declaimed Aeslin's actions as unnecessarily ruthless and nothing short of declaration of war. In the months following the sack of Marienburg, the Sea Lord's standing at court diminished almost to nothing, a situation not helped by Aeslin's prosecuting new campaigns. of reciprocity against Norscan settlements. Ironically, the same actions that isolated the Sea Lord amongst the courts of Ulthuan soon drew him closer to the Phoenix King, for Finnebar saw a ruthlessness in Aeslin that Ulthuan could ill afford to lose. So again, I think this story of like Aeslin, the fact that Finnebar, you know, is still counted among one of his allies, it just shows again that there's a real knife's edge thing with the High Elves. They are so close to being just tyrants. You know, just the whole thing with the Sundering, the Dark Elves, and the fact that the High Elves are supposed to be the good elves, the Dark Elves are supposed to be the bad elves. It's just not that simple. They're all old and bitter, essentially, and they're prone to, you know, crazy fits of wrath and vengeance. But you know, things are fine in Marienburg again, and we'll find out why. So 11 years later, there's an entry here: a common foe. A High Elf fleet under the command of Atilla the White sank a Norscan fleet before it could blockade Marienburg. Soon thereafter, trade between Ulthuan and Marienburg resumed. Yeah, that's the whole entry. It's not a big entry, but with that, yeah, trade again, so that's good. And our episode will now end. So yes, that has been episode 4. Yes, episode 4. And in the next one, we're going to talk about the next province on our, I guess, warpath, Tyrion's warpath that we've got going on right now. It's amazing how many people we're enemies with on our home turf, but still, you know, it's a fighting game, right? It's got to have war. So guys, remember, if you enjoyed this, please do comment, like, and subscribe. It all really helps the channel out. And do remember, there is that, you know, huge Empire lore play that is still relevant in terms of the lore. Obviously, the campaign is Warhammer 1, but you know, it's about the lore, right? So if you want to learn about the Empire, that's the place to look at. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think that's about it. So guys, I will see you in the next one. Have a good one, guys.